I used to believe silence was strength, that if I could just endure long enough, pray hard enough, or smile kindly enough, things would somehow fix themselves. But silence has a weight, and when it lingers in a house where love has turned to control, and control to something unrecognizable, that weight can crush a soul. My name is Dorothea Langley. Most people in this town just call me Miss Dottie, the old lady who grows healing herbs and makes lavender tea strong enough to calm a freight train. They see me with my floppy sun hat and my wooden basket of lemon balm offering strangers kind words and tinctures for their joints. They think I'm sweet. Some think I'm fragile. But they don't know the truth behind the smile. They don't know that I spent 10 years locked in my own home, not by bars, but by dependency. By a betrayal so deep, it shook the ground beneath my soul. And by a fear so thick, I forgot what sunlight felt like through an open window. They don't know that the same hands I once taught to button a coat would one day hold power over my every breath. This story isn't easy. It isn't gentle, but it's real. And if you're still here, if you're brave enough to walk with me through this memory, I promise it doesn't end in darkness. It ends in something else entirely. Not revenge, not rage, but something stronger, freedom. Come sit beside me. Let me tell you the story of how I disappeared and found myself again. There's a window in the back of my house that's never been sealed right. It lets in a little draft in winter and sings when the wind gets restless in April. Back when I still had strength in my legs, I'd stand in front of it with my morning coffee, watching the sparrows hop around the hydrangeas. That window was my clock, my calendar, my companion. But there came a time when I wasn't allowed near it. Not because of the weather, not because of my health, but because I was told it was too much stimulation for someone in my condition. I wasn't sick. I had simply begun to remember who I was. Let me start where stories should, where everything was still wrapped in good intentions and soft lies. It was the spring after my 67th birthday when I had the stroke. It came without warning. No flashing lights or thunderclap pain. Just a bowl of oatmeal slipping from my hand, the spoon clanging against the tiles like an alarm. I reached down instinctively, only to find my left side numb, hollow, as if my arm had simply vanished from existence. I woke up in a hospital bed days later. Tubes, beeping monitors, sterile ceiling tiles. And him, Marshall, my son. He sat by my side stroking my hand like he used to do when he was a child afraid of storms. His face was pale, his eyes full of something that looked like guilt or maybe fear. I couldn't speak. The left side of my mouth drooped and my words sounded thick strange. He leaned in, whispered, "Don't worry, Mama, I'm going to take care of you, just like you took care of me." And I believed him. God help me, I did. The doctors called it a moderate stroke. They said I was lucky that I hadn't lost everything. I'd need physical therapy, speech, help, rest. But I wasn't a danger to myself, just slower, more dependent. Still, Marshall insisted I move in with him. He had the spare bedroom in his ranch-style house just outside Peachtree Grove. It was modest, with faded yellow siding and a rose bush that hadn't bloomed right in years. He lived alone, never married, said he was too focused on work. But everyone in town knew he had his moods, those sudden shifts between sweetness and silence that made people uneasy. I told him I could stay in my own house, hire help part-time. He shook his head. "No, Mama," he said. "You don't understand what's coming. Stroke's just the start. They come in waves. I can't let you be alone out there. You could fall and die in your kitchen." I protested, weakly. I was still groggy from the medication. I didn't want to be a burden, but I also didn't want to give up my home. That little white house with the creaky floors had been mine since I was 24. It was where I raised Marshall, planted my first herb garden, danced alone to gospel records on quiet Sunday mornings. Every corner of it held memory. But when you've lost half your body and most of your confidence, it's easy to hand over the keys. So I did. The first weeks at Marshall's were quiet. He made soft food, bathed me gently, changed my bed linens before they even needed changing. He kept the blinds drawn, said light gave me headaches. He turned the television low, spoke in whispers, tiptoed around, like the house was sacred ground. It felt strange, like being worshipped and erased at the same time. Every evening he'd kneel beside my bed and say, "I gave up everything for you, Mama, just like you did for me." I remember the first time I tried to protest. I had just finished a therapy session on Zoom, learning to move my fingers again. I was tired, proud, a little hopeful. I could maybe go back to my place, with help. 2 hours a day, I murmured. Marshall froze. His face went blank. Then came the smile, slow and tight like a drawstring being pulled too hard. "Mama," he said, "don't make me feel like I'm not doing enough." And just like that, I apologized. It was subtle at first. He began checking my medications himself, said the nurse from the clinic wasn't punctual, that strangers couldn't be trusted. He started sleeping in the recliner outside my room, saying he wanted to be nearby in case I needed help during the night. "You called out last night," he said. "Didn't you remember?" I hadn't, but after a stroke, you doubt yourself often. He adjusted my diet. No caffeine, no salt, no sweets. Doctor's orders, he claimed, even though the discharge papers said nothing of the sort. Then he stopped letting the therapist visit. "She touched your arm wrong, Mama. I saw it. Made me uncomfortable." I didn't remember anything strange, but again I doubted myself. Maybe he was right. He bought new locks, for my safety. He moved the living room furniture, covered the mirrors, took my phone for repairs, and I began to disappear. People sometimes ask me, "Miss Dottie, when did you first know something was really wrong?" I wish I could point to one clear moment, a scream, a slap, an obvious abuse, but monsters who are raised in your arms don't announce themselves with violence. They sneak in through kindness. They braid guilt into every act of care. They make you feel like needing them is your sin. For me, it was the window. One night, around month 3 of my stay, I wheeled myself down the hall on my own, which was rare, to the back of the house. I needed air. My body felt tight, my chest heavier by the day. I reached the kitchen, opened the drawer, and found the old wooden spoon I used to use when Marshall was little. I smiled. That's when I noticed it. The back window was boarded up. Not taped, not cracked boarded, with plywood. I stared. My heart sank in a way I didn't fully understand. When I asked him later, he didn't blink. "Too much sun," he said, sipping his tea. "Too many birds." I nodded, but something inside me curled into itself. That window had never harmed me. It had only shown me the truth. He wasn't protecting me from the world. He was hiding me from it. The worst kind of prison doesn't come with bars. It comes with soft whispers and freshly folded laundry. It comes with someone saying, "I love you," while slowly erasing every corner of who you are. I still remember the taste of that moment. It wasn't bitterness. It was dust, the kind that settles quietly, until one day you realize you've stopped breathing entirely. There's something about silence that changes shape over time. In the beginning, it felt like rest. The house was quiet, the lights low, and Marshall moved like a shadow, soft, attentive, always a step ahead of my needs. When I'd wake from a nap, he'd already have my warm compress ready. When I coughed, he'd appear with tea. It seemed like devotion, and for a while I mistook it for love. But then the silence began to stretch too long. It stopped being comforting and started to feel curated, intentional, like a fog designed to blur the edges of my memory. I remember the day my friend Ruthie came to visit, or tried to. We'd taught Sunday school together back in the 80s. She was the kind of woman who made too much lemon pie and always wore scarves, even in July. A month after I moved in with Marshall, she showed up at the house holding a box of lavender cookies and a thermos of ginger tea. I only know this because I overheard her at the door. "I just want to see her," she said, her voice trembling. I strained to hear from my room, my body frozen, heart pounding. "She's sleeping," Marshall said. Calm, firm. "She's been very agitated lately. Doctor says she needs minimal contact." There was silence, then the sound of the screen door creaking open. Ruthie didn't argue. She respected boundaries, believed in doctors, believed in Marshall. I never saw her again. I asked him that evening if anyone had come by. No, he lied, then smiled. And that smile? It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that said, "I dare you to contradict me." I didn't. I told myself he was just overprotective, that he meant well, that maybe Ruthie had come but I was too tired, that maybe I'd forgotten. Because when you've had a stroke, people expect you to forget. And eventually, you do. My world became a loop of careful routines. Breakfast at 8, oatmeal, no sugar. Too much sugar's bad for your brain, Marshall would say, scooping it with clinical precision. A bath at 9, never warm enough, always brisk, always silent. Then medication, always from his hand, never from the bottle directly. Then the television turned to low volume, set to 3, always on the news channel he liked. No music, no books, no phone. Just him. He said it was structured healing. But healing shouldn't feel like erasure. Some days he was gentle. He'd brush my hair, read the headlines aloud, tell me stories from his childhood that I barely remembered, stories he rewrote in his favor. "Remember when I stayed by your side when you had that flu? I've always been like this, Mama. Loyal, caring, not like those kids who abandon their parents." Other days he was colder, impatient. He'd scold me if I tried to feed myself too quickly or questioned a medication. "You don't trust me anymore," he'd ask. And then I'd cry. And he'd say, "See, this is why we can't have visitors. You're too emotional." It was a loop, a gaslit gray-colored loop. I didn't know what was real anymore. But there was one thing he couldn't control. The journal. It was a small spiral-bound notebook I kept under the pillow behind my back. I don't even remember how I started it, maybe out of instinct. Maybe it was the only way to keep the truth anchored. Each night after Marshall left the room, I'd take it out with my right hand, the only one that still worked fully, and scribble what I could remember. Fragmented thoughts, strange phrases, things that didn't make sense at the time. He said the bath was too quick today, made me sit longer. TV turned off when I asked about news, dreamt of the window again, or was it real no mail in weeks? It wasn't much, but it was mine. A thread back to myself. The first time I suspected he was giving me more than what the doctor prescribed was during a thunderstorm. I've always loved storms, the rumble, the cleansing. It reminded me that nature was still bigger than anything I was going through. But that night I didn't feel the usual spark, just fog. I watched the rain smear the glass of the one uncovered window in the hallway, and for a moment I thought I saw my younger self out there barefoot in a green dress running through puddles. Then she vanished. I blinked, tried to remember what day it was. I couldn't. I tried to speak. My words were thick again. Later, when I told Marshall I was dizzy, he smiled and said, "It's the new supplement. It'll help you sleep. You've been restless." But I didn't ask for anything new, I whispered. He tilted his head, mock confusion filling his eyes. "Oh, Mama," he said, "you did, don't you remember?" And I didn't. One morning I overheard him on the phone. He was in the kitchen speaking in hushed tones but not low enough. "Yeah, no siblings, no cousins. It's just me and her." Pause. "No, she can't sign anything. Her hand's weak, but I have power of attorney." Another pause. "No, the house is still in her name, working on it." I froze. Still in my name. Those words rang louder than thunder. Was that what this was about? Not care. Control. That night, I dreamt of a red door. I don't know why, but in my dream I was standing in front of it, holding a brass key, hand trembling. Behind it, I heard laughter. My laughter. Then it turned to sobbing. I woke up crying. I clutched the edge of the mattress like it could ground me. And I knew in that moment if I didn't find a way out soon, I'd forget there ever was a red door at all. The next day, I did something I hadn't dared in months. I asked to sit outside, just on the back porch, just for a few minutes. Marshall hesitated. "You'll get too cold," he said, doctor said. No, I cut him off. "I remember. The doctor said sunlight is good for vitamin D." He paused, measured. "You've been confused lately, Mama, you know that. We've talked about it." "I'm not confused now," I said, gripping the arms of my chair with white knuckles. "Let me sit in the sun. 5 minutes." He stared at me. Then to my shock, he agreed. "Fine, but I'll be watching from the kitchen." He rolled my chair out to the small wooden porch. The boards creaked beneath me. The air smelled of pine needles and damp soil. The wind kissed my face like an old friend. And for the first time in months, I felt real. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and then I heard it. A bird, not just any bird, a mockingbird, singing its wild wandering song, a call that never repeats itself because it's always learning new ones. And I knew. So could I. That was the day I began to plan. I didn't have my strength. I didn't have my phone. I didn't have my freedom. But I had the mockingbird, and I had the window that never quite closed. They say trauma lives in the body. I used to think that was just a poetic way of saying pain sticks around longer than it should. But I've come to learn that it's literal. It shows up in your breath and your posture, in the way your shoulders rise even when no one's yelling. It's in the way your skin flinches at kindness, because you're not sure if it's a hand or a hook. In my case, it was also in the way I listened to walls. Because when the world outside is cut off and your life is reduced to a single hallway and a man who calls himself your only protector, you start listening to things that don't speak in words. The creak of a floorboard at night, the slow hum of the refrigerator that grows louder when you're alone, the flicker of shadows under doors, and sometimes the walls whisper. Or maybe I whispered to myself through them. After that afternoon on the porch, something shifted inside me. It wasn't bold, not yet, but it was awake. I began testing boundaries, tiny ones, asking to sit at the table instead of being fed in bed, requesting a different tea, saying no when Marshall tried to help me brush my hair. His responses were measured but cool. "Careful, Mama. We don't want another spell we don't push yourself too hard. You're fragile. You don't remember how bad you were after the stroke, but I do." I kept nodding, kept obeying. But inside I was writing everything down, not just in my journal, but in my mind. Every lie, every inconsistency, every time he said doctor's orders when the doctor hadn't come in months. The house became a chessboard, and I was learning how to play. There was one person I hadn't thought of in a long time, Aunt Geneva. She wasn't a blood relative, just a woman who helped raise me after Mama passed. She used to braid my hair and tell me stories about women who survived things people never spoke of. She called them ghost-touched women, women who'd walked through hell and came out with a glow behind their eyes that scared men who weren't ready to meet the truth. "You'll be one someday," she told me when I was 16, handing me a piece of tiger's eye. "You're soft now, but you'll harden into something no man can break." I'd laughed at the time. Now I held on to that memory like a raft in a flood. It started with the radio. Marshall had hidden or boxed up most of my belongings when I moved in, said my house was too cluttered that he was simplifying for my sake. But in the guest room closet, buried behind a pile of towels, I found my old hand crank radio. It was scratch dusty, but still working. That night while he showered, I wound it slowly and pressed it to my ear under the blanket. A gospel station came through faintly, then an old blues tune, then static, then just briefly a local news bulletin. It was like tasting honey after years of salt. The world hadn't ended out there. It had just gone quiet in here. The next evening, Marshall came in earlier than usual. He looked tired, frazzled. "Long day," I asked carefully. He shrugged bills, then added, "They cut off the internet, I'll handle it tomorrow." I nodded, but alarm bells rang inside me. There hadn't been a bill issue before, at least not one he'd ever mentioned. What else was unraveling? 2 nights later, the walls whispered again. Only this time, it wasn't metaphor. I heard something. A voice, muffled, faint, but there. I rolled to the far end of my bed, pressed my ear to the sheetrock. "Thought you said she couldn't move." It was a woman's voice. Then his "she can't. She's confused. It's just nerves." Silence. Then the front door opened and closed. The next morning I asked, "Who was here last night?" He stared at me for a moment too long, then smiled. "No one." Lie. I started recording my suspicions more carefully. I wrote notes on napkins, tucked them in books on the shelf, ones I knew he wouldn't open. I began mapping his routines, what time he left, how long he was gone, what drawer he kept his mail in, how many steps it took from my room to the back door if I used the chair instead of the walker. It wasn't escape, not yet. It was preparation. The next act of rebellion came during a bath. He usually insisted on helping me, claiming I was still too weak to handle the tub alone, even though I'd been improving. But that morning, I asked for privacy. "Just 15 minutes," I said. "I want to feel normal again." His face tightened, then relaxed. "Of course, Mama, you've earned that." He left me alone in the bathroom. I locked the door, then counted to 20 and unlocked it again quietly. I peeked out. He wasn't there. I stepped lightly, walker in hand, to the linen closet, opened the bottom drawer. Inside, unopened letters, a collection notice, and a folder. I pulled the folder out. Medical records, not mine, his. That's when I learned the truth. Marshall had been diagnosed with a personality disorder a year before my stroke. There were notes about anger, delusions, manipulation. He'd stopped therapy, never took the medication. There were also documents from a home loan against my house. My house. He'd forged my name. I stuffed the folder under my nightgown, returned to the bathroom, and wept silently as I rinsed my arms. I knew then that time was short. Not for him, for me. He was unraveling his lies, his finances, his grip on reality, and unstable men don't lose control gracefully. So I waited, and I listened. And the next time the walls whispered, I whispered back. It happened one Sunday morning when Marshall forgot to lock the front door behind the grocery delivery. I saw the bolt still unlatched. He was in the kitchen cursing over spoiled milk. I made my move. I wheeled to the door, quiet, careful, and opened it. Fresh air, voices, real voices outside. I spotted a neighbor, young woman, mid-30s, jogging with earbuds. I waved frantically. She didn't see me. Marshall turned the corner. His eyes landed on me. His hand flew to the door and slammed it shut. "What are you doing?" His voice thundered through me. "You're not well enough to be out there." Then softer, always softer after the storm. "Don't make me the bad guy, Mama. You know I'm doing my best." That night, the mockingbird came again, perched on the branch by the window that never sealed quite right. Its song was wild, erratic, joyful, and I remembered Aunt Geneva's words. Soft now, hardened later. The time for later had come. The mockingbird returned every morning after that. Same branch, same song, same sideways tilt of its tiny gray head as if it were watching me, whispering a dare. "Fly, old girl, fly." I took it as a sign. Maybe it's silly to put that much hope in a bird, but when your entire world has been reduced to 4 walls and someone else's idea of love you, begin to collect hope in scraps, in feathers, in radio static, in memories of yourself you're not quite sure were ever real. But one thing was certain now, I was going to get out. Escape wasn't a fantasy anymore, it was a strategy. I called it the Mockingbird Plan. Simple, quiet, and real. I'd only have one chance. If I failed, there'd be no second try. So I planned like my life depended on it because it did. Every night while Marshall watched TV in the living room, I rehearsed the steps in my mind. 1. Wait for his Tuesday shift at the hardware store. 2. Use the walker to reach the back window, the one with the broken seal. 3. Remove the loose screen I'd checked weeks ago. It popped out with pressure from the bottom corner. 4. Signal to the neighbor who always walked her dog at 11:15 a.m., a woman I remembered from my church days, Clarice Miller. 5. Hand her the envelope I'd hidden inside my slipper, a copy of Marshall's forged documents, a note saying, "Please, help. Call Deputy Ray. He knows me." Deputy Ray had grown up with my son. He'd played on our porch when he was 8. He used to call me Miss Dottie with the good lemonade. If anyone would believe me, it was him. I had to bet everything on a memory, a bird and a woman who might still care. The hardest part was staying calm in the days leading up to it. Marshall was unpredictable. Some days he was tender, humming old hymns while brushing my hair. Other days, he paced the hallways muttering about people stealing from him, whispering that I didn't appreciate the sacrifices he'd made. "I gave up everything for you, Mama," he'd say, staring into the distance like he was waiting for someone else to agree. I smiled, I nodded, I made myself small. But inside, I was counting minutes, measuring shadows, watching the mockingbird, and writing every new horror in my hidden journal. Then came Tuesday, the day everything would either fall apart or begin again. He left at 10:30, muttering something about needing screws and that damn receipt. I heard the car pull out of the gravel driveway, watched it turn the corner from the narrow slice of sunlight near the front curtains. I waited 5 minutes, 10. Then I moved. I had 15 minutes before Clarice's usual walk. Enough time, but only if my legs cooperated. They'd gotten stronger, not fast, but more sure. I slid on the slipper with the envelope tucked inside, gripped the walker, and pushed toward the back window. The air felt thick. Every creak of the floor was a thunderclap in my ears. I reached the sill. My fingers trembled, but the screen came loose just as I'd practiced. I set it aside, heart thudding like a drum. And then there she was, Clarice, in her red windbreaker holding the leash of her old beagle, Toby. I tapped the window once, twice, then waved. She looked up. Our eyes met. Her face shifted from polite confusion to shock. I opened the window wider and mouthed the words, "Help me." I held out the envelope. She came running. She didn't ask questions, bless her. She took the envelope, her hands shaking, and nodded fast. "I'm going straight to Ray," she whispered. I nodded, tears in my eyes. I couldn't speak. The beagle barked once. Then she was gone. The next hour was the longest of my life. I closed the window, replaced the screen, got back to my chair. I wiped my face, tidied the blanket, sat there like nothing had happened, and waited. Marshall came home early, earlier than expected. "Someone's been at the screen," he muttered, standing in the hallway. I froze. He came into the room, looked at me hard. "Did you open the window?" I shook my head, my voice caught. "No." He tilted his head, smiled, but his eyes didn't. "Don't lie to me, Mama." He walked to the window, checked the frame. I held my breath. Then the sound of tires on gravel. The sheriff's cruiser. The next few minutes came like thunder. Clarice's voice at the door. Deputy Ray's voice calling my name. Marshall shouting, "You can't just barge in," and then, hands on my shoulders, familiar, gentle. Miss Dottie Ray said, kneeling, "It's me, Ray Pritchard. I'm here. You're safe now." I broke. The tears came before I could stop them. "I didn't imagine it," I whispered. "It was real. All of it." "I know," he said. "You did good. We got you." Marshall didn't go quietly. He raged, cursed, cried, said I was confused, delusional, that I was making it up, that he loved me. They took him anyway. Clarice held my hand the entire time, and when it was over, I stared out the window. The mockingbird was still there, watching, singing. Free. They took me to a transitional care facility the same day Marshall was arrested. It was just 10 minutes from town, tucked behind a line of whispering pines with faded blue siding and creaky floorboards. The kind of place that smelled like boiled carrots and antiseptic. I hated it on sight, but it was freedom. And when you've been without it for long enough, even a borrowed kind feels like gold. The nurses called me Miss Langley at first, so formal, so distant. But after a week, they softened it to Miss Dottie and I didn't correct them. That name had survived more than my body had. It felt like a seed I could plant again. My first night there, I didn't sleep. Not because of pain, because I couldn't believe I was allowed to close my eyes without fear. No shadows waiting at the door, no footsteps pacing the hallway, no breath on my neck disguised as care, just me, and the sound of my own heart learning how to beat without asking permission. They assigned me a physical therapist named Janelle. Young, brisk, no nonsense, but her eyes were kind and she never once looked at me like I was broken. She didn't ask what had happened right away, just pointed to the parallel bars and said, "Let's see what those legs remember." The answer, as it turned out, was not much. But I moved, wobbly, uneven, but I moved, and Janelle clapped like I'd just won a marathon. That night I cried again. Not from pain, from possibility. The next few weeks were slow and full of ache. I had to relearn how to trust gravity, how to balance my body, how to breathe without clenching my jaw. Every motion felt like a question, but every answer came back with the same quiet echo. "Yes, you can." Janelle pushed me gently but firmly. "You're not broken," she said one morning as I wobbled from the bar to the chair without her help. "You're rebuilding, there's a difference." I wrote those words in my new journal that night in big shaky letters. I'm rebuilding. My speech returned gradually too. Less slur, more strength. The words stopped sticking in my throat like stones. I started saying things out loud I hadn't dared to whisper for years. I was trapped. He told everyone I was sick. He forged my name. He made me doubt what I knew. Every word was like pulling a nail from a board, painful but freeing. And one afternoon, sitting in a quiet room with a gentle voice counselor named Marcy, I said it all. Every word, every detail. Marcy didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. She just held a box of tissues between us like a bridge. And when I finished trembling and hoarse, she said, "You're not crazy. You're a survivor." That was the first time I'd ever believed it. I began walking outside again. At first, just to the small courtyard with its one crooked bench and dying hydrangeas. Then to the sidewalk that circled the property. Then to the gate. The world looked different when you hadn't seen it in years without someone standing between you and the sky. The air smelled fuller, the light softer. And every mockingbird I heard felt like a friend. 2 months into my recovery, Janelle handed me a brochure. Independent Living and Adaptive Support Housing, it read. A small program just outside of Savannah shared homes for seniors rebuilding their lives. Gardens, shared kitchens, privacy with help nearby. "I think you're ready," Janelle said. I looked up at her. My hands trembled. "You really think I could live alone again?" She smiled. "You already do, you just don't know it yet." Moving into that little cottage was both terrifying and exhilarating. I packed slowly. The few things I owned fit into 2 bags: my journal, a framed photo of my mother, a soft blue sweater that still smelled like rosemary, and the radio I had hidden for so long. The staff wheeled me out on a cool October morning. Leaves scattered across the path like a blessing. Clarice came to visit that afternoon. She brought ginger cookies and a new notebook embossed with gold lettering. "This one's for your new story," she said. I hugged her tighter than I meant to. She didn't let go. The house was small but full of light. The kitchen window faced a row of pines where birds gathered each morning to sing. I didn't unpack the sweater right away. I left it in the drawer like a promise. Instead, I sat at the table and made tea with real honey this time. No restrictions, no watching eyes, just me, free. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a long, long time. I danced, alone, to the sound of an old blues song on my radio, just a slow shuffle across the floor holding the counter for balance. But it was mine. Every step was a rebellion, every sway a vow. I am not what was done to me. I am who I choose to become. The earth was hard the first time I tried to plant again. Not just the soil, though. That, too, had gone dry under the Georgia sun, but something in me. Something that had grown rigid over the years. A stiffness not just in my knees, but in my trust. Still, I pressed the trowel down, cracked the earth open, and whispered, "Let's begin again." My little cottage came with a 6x 8-foot patch of backyard, just enough room for a few herbs, a tomato vine, maybe some zinnias if I felt brave. The staff said I could request help with upkeep, but I refused. This garden had to come from my own hands. The first thing I planted was lemon balm. The smell reminded me of the first tea I'd ever served a neighbor back when Marshall was just a toddler playing in the yard with toy trucks. It was a memory I chose to keep, one of the few untouched by what came after. Next came rosemary, basil, and echinacea. Little roots, slow miracles. Working the soil became my therapy. The quiet repetition, the sun warming the back of my neck, the ache in my arms. At the end of the day, it was the good kind of pain. The kind that tells you, you are doing something, you are alive. I'd kneel beside the bed sometimes for just a few minutes before my joints gave out and press my hands into the dirt. And every time I'd feel a whisper inside me. Not fear, not grief, but growth. Marcy, my counselor, visited once a week. We talked less about the past now and more about the strange middle ground of healing, the space where you're not drowning anymore, but you haven't quite learned how to swim. I feel guilty when I feel joy, I admitted once, like I'm betraying what happened. She nodded. That's normal. Survivors think healing means forgetting, but it's not. It's about weaving it in, making it part of your roots, not your walls. That stayed with me. Not my walls, my roots. Clarice became a regular visitor. She'd stop by with baskets of fruit stories from town, and sometimes just to sit with me in the garden and listen to the birds. She never pushed, never pried, just offered presence. That was more healing than any medicine. One afternoon, as we pruned the mint together, she said, "You should sell these." I laughed. "Sell dirt and leaves." "Sell healing," she said, picking up a sprig. "You've got more of that in your hands than most doctors in this town." I thought she was just being kind. But the seed had been planted. Weeks passed. The garden grew. And so did I. I joined a local women's group, mostly widows and retired teachers. They met on Wednesdays at the community center right next to the thrift store and 2 doors down from the diner that still served pie with too much whipped cream. We shared stories, laughed about aging knees and rebellious grandchildren. One woman brought her knitting, another her grief. I brought lemon balm. They loved it. They started asking for more. "What's good for sleep? Anything for hot flashes. My daughter's having a baby. Can I give her something to help with anxiety?" And I answered, from memory, from heart, from the things I'd once buried under fear. And suddenly I was something I hadn't been in years. Useful. Clarice helped me set up a folding table at the Saturday farmers market. Just a corner spot, a crate of labeled jars, a handwritten sign, Miss Dottie's Healing Herbs. That first morning I sold out of chamomile and balm in an hour. But what surprised me more was how people stayed just to talk. One woman cried when I handed her a small bundle of lavender. "I don't know why," she said, "but you remind me of my grandmother, and I've missed her for years." I patted her hand and said softly, "Maybe she's still here, in you, in moments like this." That woman came back every week after that. Not for tea, for peace. I started getting requests. Could I teach a class? Could I speak at the community health day? Would I consider making gift baskets for the holidays? I said yes to it all. Not out of ambition, but because saying yes was new to me. For so long I had only known no. No freedom, no voice, no choice. Now every yes felt like a door cracking open, and I wanted to walk through every single one. One afternoon while restocking my jars, I found something at the bottom of an old shoebox, the tiger's eye stone Aunt Geneva had given me all those years ago. The edges were worn smooth now, the color darker, deeper. I held it in my palm and smiled. "You were right," I whispered. "I hardened, but not into stone, into soil. Because soil remembers. It holds the dead, but it also grows the living." It had been 14 months since I last heard his voice. 14 months since the gravel crunched under the weight of his boots. Since I smelled his cheap cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. Since I felt the air in the house go still every time he entered a room. 14 months of peace. And then without warning, Marshall walked back into my life. It started with a letter, plain envelope, no return address, just my name written in a familiar slanted hand. I stared at it for a full 5 minutes before touching it. There was no tremble in my fingers this time. Just a quiet curiosity, like watching a snake sunning itself on a garden path. You don't scream, you don't run, you just wait and watch. I opened it slowly. The letter was short. "Mama, I know I messed up. I've been in a halfway house. They made me go to classes, therapy, said I had control issues. No kidding, right? I know I hurt you. I know I scared you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I miss you. Please, just once. Let me explain." I folded it back up, set it on the table, made tea. Let the words steep inside me like overbrewed chamomile. Clarice came by that evening. She saw the letter before I said a word. "You okay?" she asked, voice gentle. I nodded, then shook my head, then nodded again. "I don't know what I am." She sat across from me, eyes never leaving mine. "You don't owe him anything," she said. I knew that. And yet a small voice inside me whispered something else. "But what if this is part of your healing too?" I didn't reply right away. I waited a week, let myself feel every ripple of the storm he'd stirred up. I journaled, I cried, I planted more mint. I wrote draft after draft of a response and tore each one up. Then finally I wrote 4 sentences. "Marshall, you may come once 1 hour. We will meet in public. The garden center near Main Street. I will bring Clarice. I suggest you bring the truth, Mama. He arrived early. I spotted him from the back patio standing by the tomato seedlings like they were going to bite him. His hair was thinner, his frame smaller. Something about him seemed deflated like a balloon left in the sun. Clarice stayed nearby pretending to shop, but I knew she was watching every breath he took. I walked toward him slowly. My cane tapped the brick path like punctuation. He turned. His eyes widened. And then he cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet leak of tears down hollow cheeks. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I replied. He nodded, looked down at his hands. "I thought I was protecting you, you know, keeping you from making mistakes. You were so confused after Daddy died, so fragile. You told people I had dementia." He flinched. "I know," he whispered. "That was wrong. All of it was wrong." We stood in silence. Birdsong filled the air. I let it linger. Then I asked the question that had haunted me most. Why? He didn't have a tidy answer. Not one that could erase the bruises, not the ones on my skin, but the ones under my ribs. But he tried. I was angry at the world, at Dad for dying, at you for being so calm about it. You still sang hymns, still made tea. I felt like I was drowning and you just smiled through it. Like it didn't matter. It did matter, I said softly, but I refused to die with him. He nodded. I didn't know how to live without him. He told me about the halfway house, the court-appointed therapy, the AA meetings. Yes, he'd started drinking when I wasn't looking, said it numbed the guilt. "I'm not asking for a clean slate," he said. "I just wanted you to see me trying." I watched him closely. This was not the boy I raised, but it also wasn't the man who had locked me in my own home. He was something in between, a stranger made of both. When the hour ended, I stood. He stood too. I'm proud of what you're doing," he said, nodding toward the herb basket at my feet. I smiled just slightly. "Funny," I said, "I'm proud of me too." We didn't hug, but he didn't expect it. He just said thank you for coming. And I said thank you for leaving. That night, I wrote in my journal, "You can face the past without inviting it back in. You can witness a wound without reopening it. You can forgive and still choose not to forget. Some doors close twice, once when they hurt you, and again when you realize you're strong enough to keep them shut." I placed the letter back in its envelope and tucked it away in a box with my court papers, my medical notes, and the forged power of attorney I no longer needed. I labeled the box simply "Proof I Survived." There's a sound I hear sometimes just before dawn. A hush between birdsong and breeze. It's the sound of my name returning to me. Not the name spoken with warning, "Dorothea, don't." Not the name barked through closed doors, "Mama, just take your pills." But the name spoken gently, called with care, sung by the wind. It took me years to hear it again. But now when it comes, I pause and let it wash through me. Because reclaiming your name is the first step in reclaiming your life. The town began to whisper about me again. Not in the way they used to, those tight-lipped, sideways glances of pity or disbelief. This time the whispers sounded more like wonder. She survived that. She started her own business. She teaches classes on healing herbs. Isn't she the one who was, locked away? Yes, I was. And now I'm not. And people can't help but marvel when a woman they wrote off as weak becomes a woman they ask for advice. The church invited me to speak. Not to preach, those days are behind me, but to share. Testimony, they called it. I wasn't sure I believed in that word anymore. Not in the way they meant it. But I agreed. I stood before a room full of women, some young and unsure, some older and afraid of becoming invisible. And I said the words I once never dared to think. I was not sick. I was silenced. A hush fell over the room, then slowly nods, tears. The start of something sacred. Afterward, one woman approached me clutching her purse like a life vest. "My daughter," she whispered, "tells everyone I forget things, but I remember. I remember everything." She wept into my shoulder like we were old friends. I held her like we were survivors of the same storm. Because we were. And I realized there were more of us than I ever knew. Clarice helped me start a monthly gathering in my backyard. Nothing formal, just tea-folding chairs and truth. We called it the Garden Circle. We didn't wear name tags. We didn't need labels. You could be a widow, a mother, a woman lost in your own home. You could be angry. You could be silent. You could be healing or just learning what healing might feel like. You just had to come and sit and listen. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I told the group about the stone my aunt gave me. The tiger's eye I carried in my apron pocket through years of silence. I passed it around the circle. "Hold it," I said, "if you've ever felt invisible." Every woman did. Then I said, "Hold it again, if you're ready to be seen." And every hand reached for it once more. I started writing again, not just in my journal, but publicly. A local wellness blog picked up my article on using herbs for grief. Then a regional magazine asked for a piece about elder abuse. Then a podcast wanted to interview me. I almost said no. But Clarice, that ever-steady lighthouse, reminded me, Dorothea, your voice once saved me. It will save others too. So I said yes, to the microphone, to the questions, to the terrifying act of telling the truth, to strangers. The most surprising letter came from a young woman in Montana. She'd heard my story on a podcast. She was 29, living with her mother, trying to convince doctors her mother didn't need to be institutionalized. They think I'm overreacting, she wrote, but I know something's wrong. I wrote back. Believe what you see. Believe what she says. You don't need to shout to be right. Just stand beside her and don't move. Truth is patient. It waits for silence to break. We became pen pals. She calls me Grandma D. One morning, I found myself standing at the edge of my property, wind in my hair cane in hand, and I realized something strange. I was no longer waiting. Not for apology, not for justice, not even for understanding. I had already arrived. Right here, in this patch of sun, with time at my feet and peace in my chest. I whispered my name aloud just once. Dorothea, and the wind carried it back to me soft, sure, whole. The first frost always came earlier than expected in our part of Georgia. You'd wake one morning to the quiet sparkle of ice edging the garden beds, the air sharp with silence. The lemon balm would curl in protest. The rosemary held firm, and the zinnias, those sweet, stubborn flames, would finally bow. It was beautiful. And it was a warning. Change was coming. That year, the frost touched more than my garden. I began to feel it in my knees, first those dull aches that hummed in the background of my days, the kind that whispered, slow down, old girl. Then came the shortness of breath after walking the market loop, the tightness in my chest when I bent over to tie my shoes. I wasn't scared, but I was aware. Healing doesn't make you invincible. It just makes you present. And I was present for every shift, every chill that curled at the edge of my life. My doctor confirmed what I already sensed. Mild heart failure, he said gently. Nothing urgent yet, but you'll need to rest more. Limit stress, be kind to your body. I laughed. Kindness had always been easier to give away than to apply inward. But I made a promise to try. I scaled back my classes, turned down speaking requests, let Clarice take over more of the herb business. I kept the garden circle going, though, once a month, no matter what. That space felt sacred. It reminded me why I chose to survive. One chilly morning, I sat alone in my garden, wrapped in my old blue sweater. The tiger's eye stone sat warm in my palm. I watched a single robin tug at a worm, triumphant and fierce. And I thought about legacy, not the kind etched on gravestones or written in legal documents, but the quiet legacy of being remembered right. I didn't want to be recalled as the woman who was taken advantage of, or the mother who disappeared for a while. No, I wanted to be remembered as the woman who came back. Stronger, wiser, free. Clarice brought over cinnamon tea and an idea. You ever thought about writing it all down, she asked. Not just for a blog, but for real a-book. I smiled. You think people would want to read it? She grinned. I think people need to read it. It was hard to imagine my pain, my silence, my trembling steps printed and bound on a shelf. But then I thought of the young woman in Montana, of the weeping stranger at the garden center, of the church circle full of nodding women. And I said yes. I began writing at night. Longhand, by lamplight. It wasn't just a retelling, it was a reckoning. I wrote about the slow boiling of my life until I no longer noticed the scald. About the days I doubted my own mind. About the paper I was tricked into signing. About the way silence steals your voice one whisper at a time. But I also wrote about the tea, the garden, the robin, about Janelle's laugh, Marcy's eyes, Clarice's hands, about the morning I danced in my kitchen, and how that was the day I knew I would never return to the house I escaped from. One chapter was the hardest, the one where I forgave Marshall. Not with a clean sweep, not with absolution, but with boundaries. I do not owe you access, I wrote in that chapter, but I release the weight of hating you. Forgiveness, I learned, is not about the other person. It's a gift you wrap in silence and place at your own feet. A doorway to peace. I finished the manuscript before the holidays. Clarice read every page. She cried 3 times, laughed once, and at the end hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. You did it, she whispered. I had not just written a book, but told the truth, on paper, on purpose. We submitted it to a small regional press. And then I let go of the outcome. That, too, was part of healing the releasing, letting life unfold without always bracing for impact. A week later, I received another letter. This one wasn't from Marshall. It was from Marshall's daughter, my granddaughter, Grace. We hadn't spoken since she was 11. Now she was 21. Dear Grandma Dottie, I found your story online. I had no idea. Dad told me you were in a home because of your memory. He told me you didn't want visitors. I'm so sorry. I wish I had known. If you're willing, I'd love to visit. Not because I expect anything. Just because I want to know you. Love, Grace. I read it twice. Then again. Then held it to my heart like the first flower after frost. When she arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. Grace had her mother's height but Marshall's eyes, that slanted gray-blue, always scanning, always seeking. But hers didn't carry the weight of accusation. Hers were soft, curious. She stood at my garden gate with a mason jar of wildflowers and a tremble in her hands. I opened the gate slowly. She stepped forward. Grandma, she said, uncertain. And I smiled, Grace. Then I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I opened my arms, and she fell into them like she'd been waiting her whole life to do so. We sat under the arbor I'd built last spring, sipping hibiscus tea and letting the silence do some of the talking. She told me about school, about her part-time job at the co-op, about how she'd always loved plants even as a child, though no one in the family ever understood it. I told her about the garden, the market, the book. When I mentioned Marshall, she winced. I'm not close with him, she admitted. After everything I read, I didn't know how to look at him the same. I took her hand. You don't have to choose sides, I said. You only have to choose truth. She came back every week after that. Sometimes she brought seeds, sometimes poetry. Sometimes just herself, raw and exhausted from the weight of being young and alive in a world that so often dismisses both. I listened. And in her voice, I heard echoes of the girl I used to be. But stronger. Less afraid. She asked about my past, not out of morbid curiosity, but reverence. As if understanding my pain helped her understand her own future. One day, she pointed to the tiger's eye stone on the porch table and said, "What's this?" I placed it in her palm. "It's a reminder," I said, "that even silence has a spine." Winter came early that year. The frost was sharp, the winds loud. I caught a cold in late November that turned to pneumonia before Christmas. Clarice drove me to the hospital. Grace never left my side. The doctors were kind but firm. "You're stable now," they said, "but you'll need care. You can't live alone anymore." I nodded, not out of defeat, but acceptance. Life moves in circles. We grow, we rest, we return to others. And then if we're lucky, we let others return to us. Grace moved into the cottage in January. Not because I asked, because she offered. "Let me be the one who listens now," she said. So I taught her how to trim rosemary in winter, how to tell when lemon balm needs water, how to brew tea that soothes the gut and settles the heart. We called it the Last Bloom Project, a partnership, a passing down, not just of plants, but of story, of strength, of survival. The book was published in spring. A small launch, local press, but it spread, like mint in a broken sidewalk. Letters poured in, emails, postcards, from women in trailers, in brownstones, in rehab centers, in silence. They all said the same thing. I thought I was the only one, and I wrote back to each of them. You never were. One afternoon, Grace found me napping in the garden chair. She knelt beside me, tucked a shawl over my legs, and whispered, "Rest, Grandma. I've got this." And I knew without fear that she did. She'd carry the circle forward, not just with herbs, but with voice, with knowing, with the strength of women who've been bent but never broken. On my last birthday, the garden circle gathered one final time. Zinnias bloomed late that year, stubborn as ever. Each woman brought a cutting, a poem, or a story. And as the sun set in warm gold, they asked me what I wanted to say before the season changed again. I looked at them faces glowing in candlelight and said, "You are not a burden. You are the beginning. You are the story someone is waiting to survive through." And they wept. And I smiled. And the wind carried my name one last time through the garden I built with my own hands. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know what I've left behind. A granddaughter who listens, a garden that speaks, a book that dares, and a name that no longer trembles in the dark. I was Dorothea Lane, wife, mother, prisoner, fighter, free woman. And now just this bloom.